Welcome everybody to our first Lunch and Learn of 2020. My name is Tricia Heibel. I am the president of the International Falls Area Chamber of Commerce, and we put these Lunch and Learns together in partnership with the City of International Falls. And would like to recognize, I saw Councilor Buller here and Administrator Anderson. Welcome and thank you for coming. We also have some special guests from the county. We have Commissioner Adie, who is the current chair of the county board, and Jenny Herman, the county administrator, with us. And then our guests of honor I will get to momentarily. Oh, sorry. I lost you in the front. Commissioner McBride as well. Not to be missed. Not to be missed nor forgotten. My apologies. Yeah, I was trying to scan. Yes. And also welcome to our Sheriff, Perrin Hedlund. I don't know. I've seen you at a Lunch and Learn before, for sure. Well, and this is always a popular one for people to come. It's a great opportunity to connect with those who represent us. And so we appreciate the Senator and the Representative's time with us this afternoon. Before I again ask them to come forward, one of the things we like to do at a Lunch and Learn, because it's also a bit of a chamber networking opportunity, is we do just like to go around the room and do just a brief, like a name and a business or organization you're representing, or if you're a citizen, to just kind of give not only our speakers but everybody an opportunity to know who's in the room. So if I may start at this table here, right in the front.
Cooch County Sheriff's Office.
Lori Lyman, Public Affairs at PCA.
Pete Gaylor, Cooching County Sheriff's Office.
I'm Doug Scree, Cooching Aging Options.
Cheryl Gautreaux, Rainier City Administrator.
Pete Schultz, the International Falls Rainy Lake and Rainier Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Ken Anderson, City of International Falls.
Stacy Can, North Beach Sanitary Sewer District.
Kelly Briggs, Cal's Nails, and North Cooch Area Sanitary Sewer District.
Walt Muller, Westwood Councilor for City.
Sandy Dexter, Sandy's place.
Trevor Hasbergen, Cushing Economic Development Authority. Tony Corpy, School Board.
Joanne Smith, Cushing Economic Development Authority.
Mark Court, retired citizen.
Don Fuller, I just heard there was a good lunch.
Paul Lebanon, Cushing Economic Development Authority. Eldon Boyd, Cushing County Soil Water Conservation District Supervisor.
Ted Saxon, I'm on the school board chair and I'm on Small Town Tech.
Alyssa Haffermuller, Office of Job Training at Third Force.
Jenny Herman, Cushing County Administration. Laurel Beaver, The Journal.
Linda Merrill.
Ward Merrill, Director at Bacchus, and encouraging you to attend the June Snow Ballet Friday night at 7 p.m. here. Nice thought for that is that boys will see men dance. Super show.
Good afternoon, Eric Johnson, International Dental Arts.
Kevin Ady, Cooch County Commissioner.
Tony Olson, Northland Sales and Service. For those of you who don't know, we do have appliances, furniture, mattresses, televisions, and much more. So stop in and say hi.
Dwayne Etienne, KSDM Radio Marketing Broadcast.
Jay Burkowski, Cocoa Bottling, and Chair of the Chamber Board.
Blake Larson, Green Larson, Mortuary.
Kevin Grover, International Falls School District.
Brian McBride, Cushing County Board.
Rob Eklund, 3A Rep.
Tom Bach, retired carpenter. Live on Lake Vermilion, not too far south here, just outside Clutch, but member of the state senate to my return.
Roxanne Kelly, Provost, Rainier Community College.
Excellent, thank you. So we are all here this afternoon to hear from Senator Bach and Representative Eklund as they are gearing up to enter back into session in early February down in St. Paul. Tom, as he mentioned, is in his 5th term as Senator representing District 3 for Minnesota. He also served 4 terms in the House prior to that. And Rob Eklund is our representative representing Minnesota District 3A, and he is in his 3rd term at the House. And we appreciate your representation of our area and our community, and we always appreciate this opportunity to connect with you directly. So welcome, welcome.
Well, thanks, Tricia. And I found out
I think it was 4 years ago or 3 years ago, the first time we did one of these after my first year down at the legislature, and I told Tom to go first, and he said, well, there's something about seniority. You need to go first. So after that, I learned quick. But thanks to the Chamber for having us up here. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys, talking about what our priorities and what's going to be happening. This is a short session, what they call the short session. It's primarily policy year and bonding year. We may have some sort of supplemental budget depending on what the February forecast is. So far the forecast has looked good, and we'll see, but I think most things happen after that February forecast, so we know for sure what kind of funds will be available. I think Tom and I have about 10 or 12 bonding bills across the district for multiple things, from the airport and Van Lynn Road here to campgrounds and trailheads in other communities, and different infrastructure projects. I was telling somebody today that I was asked why we have so many bonding bills, and I said, well, you take a look across the district, all of our sewer plants were built in the 60s, and they're falling apart, as well as a lot of other infrastructure that we have to deal with, water and other things. So it's a big district, it's an old district, and we need to figure out how to put some funds into it to make things work for us. Higher ed, Roxanne, the HEPA budget is big in the bonding bills, probably bigger than it'll end up at the end, but there's a lot of requests. There's a lot of requests for some of our DNR buildings and other stuff that need to be fixed. It's just, we like to build things. I'm stealing this from Tom, but we like to build things, but we don't always like to maintain them when they're built. So I chair the Veterans Committee, so I'll be two bills that I'll have a priority with. First off, how many veterans are in the audience? Thank you. I chair the Veterans Committee in the House, and the Senator's got a suicide prevention initiative that he wants, or the Governor, has got a suicide prevention initiative that he wants brought forward. The MDVA, Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, has said that they can find most of the money in their budget for this initiative, but they're going to need some help from the state, so I'll probably be carrying that legislation. And then my key piece of legislation I'm carrying this year, again, is it's called the Veterans Restorative Justice Act, and it's to create an alternative court for veterans that may find themselves on the wrong side of the law for, could be service-related issues, PTSD and other stuff. We're creating warriors different than we used to. They're when you talk to them, especially special forces type people, they may do 3 or 4 tours in a foreign country in a combat zone in 3 to 6 years, and they're over there, and then they're rotated back and have to come back into society. And the one that I talked to that really keyed my interest in carrying this legislation is, after 13 years, the military drummed him out for mental health issues. So then all of a sudden he's on a 100% pension for mental health issues, but he's still got to go back to whatever small town he came from and try to live with his family and live in the community, and that doesn't always work. So it's a good bill to create something similar to what our drug courts are, and if we can send our kids overseas to fight for us, we should certainly be able to take care of them when they come back. So that's kind of my passion. I'm looking forward to the session. It's always fun once you get into it, but sometimes building up to it makes you wonder what's going on. So with that, I'll let the senators go.
Well, thanks, Rob, and thanks everybody for taking some time out of your day to be here. Appreciate it. Those of you that are locally elected officials, thanks to your spouses. Really, seriously, elected officials get a lot of credit for things, but nobody can serve in politics these days without a supportive family. So those of you that are family members that take some of the grief when the phone rings at home at all hours of the day or whatever day, thanks for allowing your spouse to participate in local government, because local government is really where things happen, right? I mean, the state only does so much. Most of the work is done. In the case of the sheriff's office, for example, public safety really falls more on the sheriff than it does on anything that happens at the Capitol, right? So I'll do what I can do to make sure that the state continues to be a good partner in helping you, especially financially, those counties that don't have a lot of tax capacity, allowing you to be able to deliver the things that are important to people. And it's hard to imagine anything more important than public safety. And frankly, we do such a good job of it, most of us don't even think about it. So on the session, to Rob's point, last year we put a 2-year budget together. We do that in the odd-numbered year. And we put a 2-year budget together based on forecasted revenue, but then we actually appropriate money. So we spend the money based on how we think it's going to come in. So the second year, that's always one of the major things. How's revenue coming in compared to how it was forecasted a year ago when we put the budget together? So some years there's been cuts because the money didn't come in. Some years there's been unallotments when the legislature couldn't agree. Governor Plenty actually unallotted some previous appropriations that were made. Governor Perpich had done that also during a recession. The good news is it looks like we've got a budget surplus, relatively small in the context of a $46 billion budget, but we're in the black, so that's a good thing. So I don't see a lot in the supplemental budget area. There may be some additional one-time spending on things. I think the legislature will be a little bit cautious. The way economists talk about how long can this economic expansion last before GDP growth slows down. I think the legislature is paying pretty close attention to that so we don't overcommit. So Kevin, sorry, there probably won't be additional money on the K-12 formula in a non-budget year. There probably won't be a lot of spending that carries through into the next biennium because people are a little nervous about what's going to happen to GDP growth. So, and those of us that have been around longer really care about that because we've been through those periods when there wasn't money to do anything, even things everybody agreed on, there wasn't money to spend on. So probably not a lot in the supplemental budget area, but good news is that we're in the black. The other issue, and Rob mentioned, is a capital investment bill, a bonding bill in public infrastructure around the state. That will get done. The only real question is going to be kind of how big is it going to be. The governor's proposed a $2 billion bill. It's probably not going to be that big. The legislature will probably, I would guess, are going to pare that back some. But it'll be somewhere, I think, between $1 billion and $2 billion of investment in public infrastructure. It will build real heavy on the deferred maintenance side of things. We've got a lot of state buildings that have kind of fallen into disrepair, whether it's the colleges or the university or DNR facilities. The DNR has more buildings around the state than anybody, and the legislature hasn't been very good at keeping up with the maintenance on them, roofs and heating and ventilation and siding and windows. And so I do think there's more and more talk about kind of fixing up some of the stuff we have before we build new stuff. So I think it'll be a little heavier on that than we've seen in previous years. That's probably, it's not as flashy as building new things, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And then the third thing that generally gets major thing that gets considered in these non-budget years, election years, is are we going to put anything on the ballot? Because in Minnesota, that's the only way to get something in the Constitution is have the legislature put it on the ballot and have people vote on it. There are a number of proposals out there. I think probably nothing, I'm guessing nothing probably will make it through the House and the Senate and get on the ballot, but this is the year where that normally gets considered. So those bills that have been introduced proposing constitutional amendments that I think, well, none of them were heard in the Senate last year. I'm not sure about the House, but this year they'll probably get hearings. And the one that I kind of like to talk about that we're not going to do, but I think we should, is remember when you go to vote, you flip the ballot over, you get to vote for judges, and you don't know who anybody is on there? There's been a bill floating around for years called the Judicial Retention Bill. Because constitutionally, judges have to stand for election. They have terms, just like everyone else does. There's a bill floating around that says judges are appointed by a governor, and then there's a judicial review panel of judges that determine if judges have to face the voters or not. And they think if judges are doing a good job, if this judicial review panel thinks they're doing a good job, they shouldn't go out for election. But the panel could also say, no, that judge, based on whatever circumstances, needs to face the voters. We all looked at ballot and don't have a clue. We're not making the kind of decisions that informed voters should make. And I just think a review panel of judicial members would probably give us, not that we're getting bad outcomes, but would give a little more thought to the process. I also think it's not going to happen because it will write campaign literature, and this has been around for years, it'll write campaign literature that says, Rob Eklund took your right to vote for your judge away from you, right? So leaders are a little anxious, in election years especially, if you're the leader, you get a little anxious about what do you how far out on the plank do you stick your members, even if it's a really good idea, potentially, what kind of campaign vulnerabilities do things like that create. So even some of the things that everybody kind of agrees might be a good idea don't get done because of some external forces. Those are kind of the three things that mainly get considered. There will be some policy conversations about things like emergency insulin. There's a serious problem what's happened with the spike of the cost of insulin. So someone loses a job, they lose their health insurance. They don't have $500 to buy their insulin, life-sustaining drugs. So should the state have an emergency program where you can get a 30-day supply until you figure out what you're going to do relative to health insurance to get that. I think something's going to happen on that. The debate right now is, well, who's going to pay for it? Do we make the big pharmaceutical companies pay for it, or does the state pay for the cost of this program? That seems kind of where we're kind of stuck. But I think we'll find a deal on that. There's a couple policy issues that are going to be very high profile, will get a lot of press. I would predict neither one will happen. One is something on additional restrictions on gun ownership. I just think, and the background check thing is pretty popular politically, but sometimes those polls, it depends on kind of how you ask the question. So you have to kind of temper that, some of the poll numbers you see sometime depending on how questions were asked. And the other one I think that probably is going to get a lot of conversation, but nothing will happen, is the idea of recreational marijuana. It does have some electoral consequences, interestingly enough. And I think that's part of the reason you see the House Democrats, for example, traveling around the state holding meetings, taking input on that. Some of the reason for that is if somebody files for statewide political office and they give themselves a name of their party, if you get 5% statewide, you become a major party status in Minnesota, which means you get public financing. So for your party, so anybody that files under your party name, well, what happened in 2018 is two different candidates that filed with marijuana in their name, and I don't remember what the names of the two are, but there are now two parties in Minnesota where if you file under that name, you can get public financing, which makes you much more viable. You can do things like the political contribution refund program. You get state general fund money for your campaign, albeit not enough to run the campaign, but you get some to make you somewhat viable candidate. So two of those marijuana parties now exist and potentially could show up on the ballot with public financing. So that anytime there's a third party with public financing like that, the two major political parties get a little anxious about, well, who does the third party take votes away from, right? And in districts like ours that tend to have a Democratic bent, you're not as concerned. But in a lot of other districts that are kind of swing districts that can go either way, having somebody on the ballot with a third party that maybe takes 3%, 4% of the vote can make a difference in what the outcome is. So that's way more than you wanted to know about that, but I think it's part of the reason you're seeing a little more attention to the recreational marijuana thing than it probably deserves. I don't think it's going to happen. I actually don't think it should happen, personally. Okay, some of you maybe decide not to vote for me over that, but virtually everybody that has come to see me to advocate for it has said, look at all the money it will raise. And my response back has been, wrong reason. Wrong reason to create another drug, call it what you want, available to the public. Medical marijuana, I was one of the people responsible for doing that. I think there were some very, very legitimate reasons. A lot of people's health was helped by that. There were some strong reasons to do that. Going and having to get a prescription for something is way different than being able to buy it over the counter somewhere. And it's interesting, we're learning a lot about what's happened in other states that have legalized it. Colorado spends more in their state budget than they raise in tax revenue on all of the costs associated with it. Oregon, the black market's bigger than the legal one. Because in Oregon, they decided everybody could have a half a dozen plants. You could grow them. So there's a whole cottage industry of people who are growing plants at home and selling them out on the street, and there's no taxes on any of that stuff. So there are still, I think we would be wise to take some time and see what the experience of other states have been on this before we rush too fast. And actually for me personally, I will tell you, if there is a group that I probably pay more attention to what they think than any other, it's the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, MPPOA. I mean, that's the umbrella organization of law enforcement around the state. You know, I think most of us probably agree public safety is the most important thing to all of us, to all of our families, and what law enforcement thinks matters to me. So, and I'm pretty sure they probably have a position against it right now. They got enough to deal with without having to add a whole nother problem to their law enforcement ranks. So, these short sessions when everybody's on the ballot, House and Senate, it's real hard to get things done because elected officials are looking over their, people like us, we're stuck in St. Paul. You got an opponent that's out knocking doors and working 200 miles away. People start getting pretty anxious when their opponent's at home working and you're in St. Paul. So it's hard to keep people's attention. They've got caucuses to go to, so they're calling delegates, and they got county unit conventions and Senate district conventions. The campaign starts to gear up in February for lots of people, not everybody, or districts that are in play, but enough are that it's real hard to get everybody focused, to get everybody there to get things done. So just the nature of electoral politics, and in fact, I guess that's the way the system's supposed to work. I mean, our framers wanted to keep their elected officials close to the public, so you make them run often so that they are kind of forced in a situation of having to pay attention and stay in contact with you. And the downside of it is we all got to deal with election year ads.
Flyers.
And flyers, and way more, probably good for paper mills. I mean, but it's not tons is going to happen. I will say this election is pretty important, and I'll say that's not for the newspaper's submission, but the next legislature that gets elected that comes in November are going to draw the legislative boundaries for the next 10 years. It's a redistricting year. We'll get the next legislature that comes in November, we'll get them, and we can talk about this, Laurel, so you can write an editorial on it someday. We'll get a new federal census, and then the legislature will go to work and draw maps of what legislative districts should look like. And they basically all have to have the same number of people. There's a deviation number in there. You can't draw them all exactly the same, right? But I think the standard deviation is no more than 2%. And that you have to be a little careful if you're going to try going above that, to have one district with 2% more than the other for fear of ending up in court and having a judge decide. Because there is judicial oversight about kind of the one person, one vote issue. So you try to draw them as closely as you can to all the same size. And you all know what happened in 2011, last time we did redistricting 10 years ago. Goodrich County used to be in a different Senate district than it's in today. Tom Saxog was your senator and Tom Anzels was your House member. And what happened in 2011 is that we had a Republican legislature who, and just to be perfectly honest, it's the most partisan thing legislatures do. You try to draw maps that are to your advantage, right? And So the Republican legislature drew a map that Governor Dayton thought was overly partisan, so he vetoed the bill. In that case, then it goes to the Supreme Court, and the court draws the maps. And the current set of maps we have, the courts drew. The chief judge appointed a 5-judge panel with judges from around the state that had some sense of geography, and the courts drew the map that we currently have today. The result of that was Coochiching County moved from the district with Grand Rapids in it to the one with Cook in it. Right? And Hermantown, if you can believe it, is in your district now, and Proctor. So that is one of the things so there is a reason actually to have democratic control, assuming that I'm the leader in the House. You want me drawing the maps. if you live in Coochiching County, you want me drawing the maps, right? So that's kind of looking fast forward ahead. The election becomes pretty important because it does kind of set the table for the next decade. That's what the districts will look like. So, but with that, do we have time for questions? I know people have jobs to get back to. Take too much time. Somebody?
Senator and Representative, I appreciate your time, and from the viewpoint of a destination marketing organization, I want to bring up a topic that I'm sure you've heard many times before. It's the need for regulation of short-term vacation rentals in residential areas. It's an issue that's kicked from township to city government to county government to state government, and it gets kicked all around but never actually resolved. We need to have regulation so that we can offer this type of housing that's in demand and yet protect neighboring property owners, neighborhoods, and make sure that our vacationing visitors are protected and kept safe. So I'm here on behalf of RCVB to advocate for legislation on that issue.
Well, I do think something's going to happen on that. I'm not surprised that came up because the law, this whole vacation rental business is really growing, right? Especially with all the the VRBOs, the air hubs, and the Commissioner of Revenue sent a memo out to assessors back in May to just reinforce the current law, because some assessors have asked her the question, how do we appraise or value these cabins, seasonal recreational cabins, that really look like commercial businesses because they're being rented all the time and they're income producing property. So the Commissioner of Revenue took a look at the law, wrote a memo to the assessors and said the property should be assessed based on its primary use. That's what the law says. Now the challenge that creates is, to our 87 assessors around the state, there's not a description in law of what primary use means. So some assessors, for example, Cook County, the assessor up there took the position that if it's rented 183 days and you own it 180 for your use, 182, then the primary use is commercial because it's being rented more than you're using it. Other assessors have taken the position, how many days is it rented versus how many days do you personally occupy your cabin, that you're there. So now that's a much smaller number than 183 probably, right? So right now the challenge is, the reason I think something's going to get done on this is, it's Lake County, for example, Two Harbors, Silver Bay, that county assessor sent out a notice and said, if you got a seasonal cabin and you're renting it, it's commercial, period. So assessors are kind of all over the board on it. So the legislature is going to have to give some clarity to what primary use means, or we're going to have to create another category in the property tax system different from seasonal recreational cabins, because clearly these are not seasonal recreational cabins in the eyes of legislative intent. I think we all know what we think a seasonal recreational cabin is, right? Well, these things, and a lot of them are being purchased for rental purposes, but are just being, still are being classified as seasonal recreational cabins. So I don't know what it's going to look like yet. I just know that the legislature, there's going to be a pretty strong appetite on the part of the legislature and from the Department of Revenue and from the Statewide Assessors Association for the legislature to provide some guidance, at a minimum, some definition of what primary use is. And maybe it turns out to be another classification, where if you have a seasonal rec property that's rented for some part of the year, then it falls into another classification. I think one of the things that likely is going to happen is seasonal cabins don't pay into the school district for voter-approved levies, operating levies. They don't pay. Commercial property does, but cabins do not. So here you've got this whole business model of cabin rentals that look like a commercial business to people that own a storefront that aren't paying to the school district. I do think at the end of the day, one of the things that will be included, and even in Cook County, where they're probably a little further ahead on this issue than any other county because they have so many of them, even in Cook County, the proposal that the assessor is asking us to consider puts them on the voter-approved levy for schools. And it's something I've long advocated for, actually, because if you look at Cook County, about 65% of the entire tax capacity of that county is cabins. So when you take that much of your tax capacity and say you can't levy for schools, it creates a heck of a burden on the commercial properties and on the homeowners when more than half of your property in your county is off the tax rolls for school purposes. So that's one thing they've conceded in Cook County, at least, is that, hey, we're willing to pay the school levies because we are generating some revenue. So I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I do think sorry for the long answer, it's going to get taken up.
Another thing with a county like Cook County, they only have about 8% of their property that's on the tax rolls anyway. The rest of their land is all public property, so it puts a bigger burden on them. I tell people all the time it's great having a guy that's a former tax chair, Bill, talk about this.
David Dill said the same thing.
Yeah, Senator Bach, Representative Eklund, Wayne Etienne with KSDM Radio. When the House and the Senate looks at revenue loss, do they look at things like what's going on right now with the state of Iowa having sport line betting, and now everybody from the cities is flocking down into Iowa and doing their sport betting, and Minnesota not having it, or things like the Minnesota State Lottery selling online, but that company that does that selling is out of New York City, not out of the Minnesota Lottery.
So I had a friend of yours that inquired about this. I'm sure you know who he is.
Yes.
He was frustrated about that, and I believe that's a vendor service. So when it went out, they were the one that won the right to do that, even though they're from New York. So there's probably something with interstate commerce on that. The other thing is having a couple of native-owned casinos in my district, in our district. They are not in the least interested in putting the infrastructure they need into for sports betting at the casinos, and that's probably the venue where it would have to be run at by the system that we already have set up in the state, because they would basically be providing a service without gaining much revenue from it. So they're not interested in that at all. So if you listen to your constituents, I was on the sports betting bill until lobbyists from the two tribes got hold of me and said you should probably not be on that bill.
Yeah, I don't think anything's going to, I agree, I don't think anything's going to happen on sports betting, but to your larger question, putting a revenue number on the things we do, we only count what's tangible. We don't do, that would be called dynamic scoring, and we don't do something dynamic scoring. So if we pass something, this is how much the savings is going to be. We don't, those things that are pretty subjective, that are hard to calculate, we don't score that. So we wouldn't score something like, if people don't bet in Minnesota, they're going to bet in Iowa, we wouldn't give that a score. We would score if we did sports betting how much money we think it might bring in, but we would give no consideration to what happens across the state lines.
Elvin.
Elvin White, Cushing County, SWCD. The question I got is, I sit on the Northern Landscape Committee for the Minnesota Forest Resource Council, and right now the council has no staff. Do you see at some point here hiring some people to staff the Minnesota Forest Resource Council? Again, the only person that's there right now is like this co-op student, and he's holding the seat down.
Well, I'm assuming they're going to replace Deanne Stish. I mean, she was the executive director of it, right?
She was, yeah.
For whatever reason, they terminated her employment. I don't need to know.
Yeah.
But they must be out advertising
They're out
the
looking, but
position, I would think.
They have that one in Lindbergh Ecola's position and Calder Hibbert's position. All of them are empty. That's why I'm asking.
I haven't heard, but like I said, I assume Deanna will be replaced, and then her staff or that person's staff will probably follow.
It's probably better to hire the executive director first and let them kind of fill in who they want to work with, rather than, because once you hire state employees, like for the Forest Research, it's hard to get rid of them, right? So a new executive director comes in, it's just nice for them to be able to pick their own people, so they probably should pick that person first.
Larry?
Internet sales tax. What is that going to do to the budget? Is there projections on that?
What is what can do?
The internet sales tax, the Amazon.
So Lori asked about the internet sales tax. In I used to know the date back when I was tax chair. There was a Supreme Court decision called the Quill decision. It came out of North Dakota, and it said you can't tax sales that if a business doesn't have a physical presence in your state, and that's always been interpreted to be a storefront. You have to have a brick and mortar storefront, and if you don't have a brick and mortar storefront, you don't have to pay sales tax. And as the online sales, I want to say that was in the 80s, and it was quite a while ago. As online sales have expanded, more and more states have raised objection to that. Brick and mortar businesses, for example, have raised a lot of objections to that. Best Buy's been out in front on that for a long time. They feel like and back when I was tax chair, the CEO came to see me. He said, "Tom, we're a showroom. People come in, and for those bigger purchases, and TVs have come down a lot in price over the years, but he said people come in, they look at our TVs, they decide which one they want to go buy, they go home and they buy it online and they save the sales tax." So the issue's really been putting brick and mortar businesses at some disadvantage because there was tax savings. Well, the state of South Dakota filed a lawsuit against a company by the name of Wayfair, and it actually ended up all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled about a year ago, maybe a little more, two years ago, that online sales have tax. So that's the current law. We've had a terrible time figuring out how much money that raises. The Department of Revenue was, in the early days, were just guessing how much sales tax you're going to collect, because you don't know what's going on online unless things are registered, right? If you buy a boat online, you have to register it, right? Or a car or something. But early on, the department thought it would raise about $60 million a year. I think the number is probably higher than that. I haven't asked what it turned out to be. But it is definitely part of the reason we have a surplus, because we're collecting money now on online sales that we didn't collect prior to that Supreme Court decision.
Does all that revenue just go to the general fund?
The revenue all goes to the general fund. Okay. Yep. And I don't know what happens local sales tax wise, and I should have said in my initial remarks, this will be for me a first session about Bob Anderson coming to see me. Bob was a little controversial, right? You always knew what Bob thought. But he was a tremendous advocate for more than just International Falls and Coochin County, for rural Minnesota. I mean, a tremendous advocate. I saw him long before he became mayor. He came down for Chamber Day or for Minnesota Forest Industries, timber producers. We'd see him every year, and always appreciated seeing him because his heart was always in the right place. So it's going to be different not having him come down. He probably single-handedly is responsible for this interrupted city sales tax. He worked pretty hard on it. So if you're against it, blame Bob, not me, right? Or Rob. We carried the bill, but seriously, I think it's fair to say this, and Rob too. We tend to defer to the local officials, whether it's county officials or it's city officials. They're just closer to the public, and we represent all kinds of communities, right? And local city councilors or county commissioners know what the pulse of the community is and what the community needs much better than we ever can, right? So when we get resolutions from a city or county saying, hey, we'd really like you to consider doing this, I mean, we give that some pretty deep consideration, so.
Yeah, I've had people ask me, why are you carrying that bill? Well, because such and such a city has brought it to me and their constituents want it, and that's why we're carrying it. You can't know, there's absolutely, with the district size of ours, you can't know what every community's needs are without the state councils or county boards coming to us and say, this is what we need in our school districts. Probably any of that stuff.
What's really, really interesting about the sales tax issue is, and this is the perfect example, St. Louis County passed a 1/2 cent county sales tax for transportation. So did Lake County. So did Cook County. Now we've had 2 harbors do it. I've had Proctor do it. I've had Hermantown do it. I can count on this hand, now the city of International Falls, how many people have ever emailed me objecting to that local option sales tax. So I would argue, if people support what the money's going to go to, they're not tax averse. They want their infrastructure fixed. And people want streets and highways and bridges. They want a safe transportation infrastructure. So it's been kind of amazing to watch because, you know, they're pretty significant on a county-wide, pretty significant tax increases, but the public seems to be acceptable of it as long as they know where the money is going to go to something that's important to them. So I think, are we collecting now here?
Yep.
City.
As of October 1.
October?
Okay.
And just, you know, one thing that happened with it, that it hasn't become a big issue right now is, I think the taxing district goes by zip code, if I'm correct, 56649. There's many people in the lake area and around that do not live in the city of International Falls get their mail at 56649. So they always charge city tax on their gas bill, their electric bills, even though it's consumed outside the city. But
Amazon,
yeah, and all that stuff. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know how else you would designate an area other than by zip code. But these other bills that come in that weren't purchased directly within the city of International Falls are being charged sales tax.
Well, and that's probably not something the legislature is going to take up, and because just because you don't live in the city doesn't mean you don't benefit from improvements that are made, right? So shouldn't somebody in Rainier, for example, pay something to help International Falls? I mean, just think of the people driving in every day. Cloquet is the perfect example. Well, I mean, the paper mill in Cloquet is the biggest business in town. And there's a lot, and Highway 33 comes through. There's a tremendous amount of what's called overburden in some of those communities that have major anchor businesses like this. So the thought kind of is, gee, well, you know, people that live outside the perimeter of the city, shouldn't they have to do something to maybe help with the library or help with city streets or street lights, or, you know, because there's some benefit to them when it's kind of your retail center and you're coming in to do a lot of your business, or whether it's having your kids in school or, you know, whatever it is. But so it's probably not something to address. But interestingly enough, on that issue, the Mall of America has its own zip code. the mall, right? Because it's just so big, right? And the collections are, you know, what they are. But Bloomington does not have a local sales tax, though.
Bloomington does not.
Bloomington has a volunteer fire department. Can you imagine that? It's a town of 90-some thousand people.
Doug.
I know the governor's interested in Minnesota becoming age-friendly, and I'm just wondering, do you see anything on the horizon this year for services to older adults being improved or funded?
I don't know exactly what that means. Right? Clearly, we're building an awful lot of long-term care facilities, especially assisted living, kind of the continuum of care. As people can't stay in their homes, we're building, just permitted another one in Duluth, just 135 beds or something. What's interesting is as all of us baby boomers transition into those years, someday when we're all gone, what's going to happen to all those buildings, right? They're going to get paid for, I suppose. We'll be around long enough to satisfy the debt service, but boy, we're building an awful lot of it, and the generation coming behind us isn't as big. So But I mean, I hope it means allowing people to stay in their homes as long as they possibly can, because that is by far the best option for people, and the cheapest option is to provide the kind of in-home care that people need. Kind of a menu of things where you can buy what you'd like to buy. But I haven't read enough about that to know what he's thinking about, but certainly sounds like something worth having a conversation about.
What's up?
Anything on the agenda for workforce development? Workforce development, any hot topics? One number.
It'll be interesting to see. I sit in the Jobs Committee, and we'll see what Representative Mahoney has up his sleeve for his last term. He's announced his retirement, so as you can imagine, there's some jockeying for position for when he does leave, because that's a plum committee to have. So I don't know. He's been sending out emails to all of us to find out what our priorities are, because he wants to handle them, and it'll be interesting to see where that workforce development is always a hot topic. So I'm sure there will be something that we'll be looking at.
Well, I think on workforce development, the most important thing we probably can do a year from now when we're working on a new state budget, the state's got to provide more support to our colleges and universities. We just have to. I mean, you read more and more about what's happening to the cost of tuition, right? I mean, the state has really dropped the ball in higher ed. And I was there. I was part of making it happen. We went through more than a decade of managing a deficit, and we had no money. And that's why local government aid to cities and county program aid to counties is finally now back at the 2002 level, because we had no money. The state had no money to partner with local governments to help deliver things like public safety. The other area, and there was a fallback on that. We didn't need to give money to counties or cities because they could raise property taxes. So things would get taken care of at the local level. We've kind of forced them into that. That's part of the reason property taxes have gone like this, because the state has not kept up being the partner in helping local governments. The other area of the budget that was badly impacted during those years when more than a decade we ran deficits was higher ed, because the legislature didn't put money there either, because they could raise tuition. So that's gotten to be a larger and larger share of the cost of higher education. During the Arnie Carlson days, and I was there, the state paid for 2/3 of the cost of tuition at our state colleges. And today we're less than 50%. So that fact that tuition is going up is absolutely the fault of the legislature, not so much the institutions. Now, we'd like them to be more efficient, and I think they're trying to figure out how to do that. But the state was able to hold back on funding there, and frankly, where the money has gone in the last 20 years is into the health and human service budget. Because as we get older, I mean, the state's a huge purchaser of health care, and we all know what's happened to the cost of health care. It's becoming a larger and larger and larger piece of the state budget. The other area of the state budget that's been growing that you can't do a lot about is corrections. I mean, I do not know, and if somebody has the answer, please tell me so that I can articulate it to somebody. Why do we have so many mental health problems in our society right now? And I'm sure Kevin sees it in the school. And so, I mean, our whole corrections budget and our courts budget have been going up kind of like the health and human service budget have, and you have to do those things, right? So it's kind of been, when we've had deficits, those two areas kind of sucked up all the money that we had, and we weren't able to keep up on K-12 funding either. And truth is, they could go to voter-approved levies. So there wasn't an urgency to keep up in that area. But so that's why I'm so protective of the state's budget reserve. It was something that I put in, Senator Skoye and I put together in 2014. We've got $2 billion sitting in the state's budget reserve right now. There's a lot of pressure to spend it from people. But the fact is, someday we're going to have another recession, and we'll need that money in order to bridge the revenue shortfalls. But I'm constantly fighting against people that want to spend that budget reserve. Not that people don't come to us with good ideas. People come with a lot of great ideas. But somehow you have to have some restraint, knowing that there's another downturn coming somewhere. And if you don't have some money put away, you can't partner with local governments or put money into K-12 or higher ed or all the things that kind of take a back seat when revenue runs short.
Tom, just in the last 5 years, I believe, Cushing County, the City of International Falls, and local healthcare providers, I think we've supported Rain River Community College in excess of $250,000, maybe even $300,000. Those are local dollars that go to support that college and keep the doors open. That's state college. And without that support, I'm not so sure that it'll be a vacant building. So I know that the people in this community do support that college, and I hope we can get that support at the legislature.
So that really long answer to workforce development. I mean, spending more money on higher ed is really important. People need retraining. We've got to spend more money on vocational education. There is a huge, and Lori could probably, at the mill, they probably have a heck of a time finding people with mechanical skills with their hands. And all the building trade unions are having a huge problem. There were so many baby boomers that went into the trades, and now they're going out the other end. And this next generation either aren't interested in working with their hands, or they haven't had a chance to get exposed to it. So they don't know what it is. And so some additional recruitment of money in the 2-year programs where people can learn a skill is going to be really, really important, because there's going to be a lot of good jobs that pay real money. I can remember my dad telling me growing up, he went to Dunwoody for carpentry after he got out of World War II. So I kind of grew up around carpentry. And I'll never forget him telling me, and he passed away 5 years ago, that if you learn how to do something with your hands, you will never be hungry. Because someone will always need somebody to do things they can't do. And right now we got a huge, huge problem. I mean, I got a son that is an engineer at U.S. Steel Mintac. You know, they're probably some of the highest paying jobs in the state. They cannot find electricians, millwrights. I mean, they start at like $60,000 sweeping the floor, and they can't find people that can turn a wrench. Now, you got to pass a drug test. That's part of the problem, right? But there's going to be some tremendous opportunities for young people in kind of those hands-on vocational type occupations.
And you see some of the way education's changing. There's an academy school down at Staples where they're getting the kids interested in fields. We're going to be building an academy-style school down on the range, Virginia, Elwith, and Gilbert, and so you're seeing some changes. But like Tom said, I mean, if you're a welder right now, you could go just about anywhere in the state and make $100,000 a year and not have a problem.
I just want to plug 218 Trades on that, the website 218trades.com. My agency had a report in creating that website, and it's all about getting young people in the trades in our area, in 218, northeastern Minnesota. So you or any people you know are potentially even interested in the trades, go to 218trades.com.
See, I just want to make a comment to both of you, and I want to thank you both personally and publicly for your strong support for our area. I mean, City of International Falls and Cushing County have both benefited from your support for our public infrastructure projects here. The airport terminal is a new building. Really had a lot of state involvement in it, and your support was very important. We currently have the airport reconstruction project going underway, and the state and federal support for that is just instrumental in making that happen. And then Highway 53 will be doing, MnDOT will be doing that project next year. It'll be a 2-year project. With the state support to make that happen, it's really key to bringing our infrastructure up to standard. And I just want to thank you, because I know you've both been supportive of that and been supportive of bringing our LGA up to where it needs to be too. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
And along those lines of transportation, I love those additional passing lanes on 53 coming up and down. It's another great infrastructure.
I'll tell you on that, Tricia. If any of you know Dwayne Hill, our district engineer, he worked his tail off to make sure those passing lanes happened. He did it with minimal wetland impact and all that kind of stuff. They figured out how to get them, and desperately needed. I don't know how many trips this fall, and I was wondering if they're gonna get them done, but once they were done, they were very nice. We were heading south of 53 to get around.
We just got to figure out the passing lanes, not 4-lane.
Well, and part of that was, to give them a little credit, they got done so late that the painting didn't take very well. So they'll be back this spring repainting it and stuff, and it'll be a little more, I think it'll be a little more usable for people to figure out. When Dwayne first told me about these 3-lane passing lanes, I said, no way. He says, they work, Rob. Believe me. I think you and I were in them because I thought, how in the world is this going to cause problems? But they're nice. They work well.
Couldn't get the full tour to your point, right? It's a great addition to...
It's great.
4-lane causes wetland issues.
No, but I'm just saying, there's people that, as soon as you get to where the 2 lanes are open to you, they're right in the left-hand lane.
Yeah.
They think it's 4-lane for that mile and a half. So.
Yeah, there's an element of
education
risk, right? Especially when there's snow covered, you don't know which.
Yeah.
I didn't see any paint this morning.
I just want to keep between the rumble strips.
That was the speed.
So rumble strips, cute story. So MnDOT got money from the federal government, zero deaths money, to put rumble strips on 2-lane roads. 2-lane roads. So you saw that happen here, right? They put rumble strips up from Cook to the International Falls. The other place they put them up here is on Highway 61 on the North Shore. And when they put those on, David Dill was the rep. We got just flooded with calls on the North Shore because you could touch the center line, you hit the shoulder. And people on the North Shore don't go there, and a lot of homes are close to the road going up the shore, both sides. And people were upset about it. I ain't kidding, we got a couple hundred phone calls or emails from people mad about these rumble strips. So, interestingly enough, Highway 53 was done at the same time. Same time. Same rumble strips. Instead of a couple hundred emails or phone calls, I got one. David Dill called me. He said, true story. He said, Tom, those damn rumble strips, he said. He didn't live that far off the highway, but I think he was toying with me more than anything else. But he's the only one that called me about it. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.